So next speaker needs no introduction, but I will do anyway. So Paul Bate is the Chief Executive Officer of the UK Space Agency. Paul has extensive experience in government, advising the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, and has a background in particle physics, which makes him the perfect person to lead the UK Space Agency in the coming years. So welcome Paul Bate to the floor.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for having me. I was here in virtual form last year. Great to be here in person this year. So thank you, Sarah, and Rebecca as well for that previous speech. Look, I have to make confessions, as Sarah said. My background is in particle physics, and if I think back 30 odd years ago now, I was at the RAL Summer School for Particle Physics. I just wanted to share with you an insight into how people think about the RAL Summer School. So, and it was an extraordinary and important piece for particle physics. To the select group, it was Top Gun. That's what it was. It's important to say it was only recognised as Top Gun by particle physicists. There were the occasional, just differences, but there was a little bit less sort of shirtless beach volleyball playing and a little bit more talk about neutrinos than maybe, who knows, maybe Top Gun 3 will be more neutrino focused. But nonetheless, so I feel like my history is linked to RAL. I had a PPARC fellowship or a sponsorship to do my PhD. So I feel kind of closely connected to being here. What I would like to talk about, and I will obviously talk about space, I will talk a bit about the achievements across the space sector. But what I really want to talk about, I think I touched on this last year, the theme really is that space is a team sport. That is really what I want to bring together. Many of you will have heard me say that in the past, but I don't say it glibly. I don't just say it because it's nice to kind of assume. I say it because I think it's fundamentally important to every one of us in the room who is obviously part of the team, but to the much wider group of us who are beyond everybody who's online or so on, in the audience. It matters that we come together. It matters that we're greater than the sum of our parts. I'll try and break that down a little bit. So I'm going to argue that any successful team, Southgate, be aware, doing rather well at the moment, is you have to have shared purpose. You have to know what you are trying to achieve, whether it's to win the World Cup or it's to better your ambitions in space. You need to know collectively what you're going to try and achieve. So I'm going to just touch on a bit about our shared purpose. You also need to know what you're doing on the team. To sort of pursue that sporting analogy. It's very different to being goal, to being up front, or being in defence, being a coach or a physio. But it all really matters. But you need to know, you need to do your job well and trust in other people to do their jobs well. And I talk a little bit about the role of the UK Space Agency in the overall space team. And you've got to communicate, you've got to talk, you've got to engage. A little bit about what I'm doing here, I guess, today. So I want to talk about what we have achieved together. I want to look to the future and see what we are going to do in the years and the decades to come. But those to me are the three things that define successful teams. I said to my oldest son at the weekend when they got battered playing hockey, that it really, the successful teams are not the teams that win every game. There is no such team really, or at least they're competing at the wrong level. It's the teams that understand when things aren't quite right and can talk about it, and then they can be successful going forward. He looked at me as if I should just have said it was cold, it was wet, and the ref wasn't on their side. But I still thought it was a fine piece of parenting. Let me talk a little bit about our shared purpose. So having sort of been in the role for a year or so, it's not difficult to be inspired by what we collectively achieve. But when we go beyond the value proposition of the Space Agency that I'll talk about, or the science-driven, technology-enabled starting point for RAL Space, I would argue that our shared purpose is to fundamentally bring the value of space to benefit humanity, to benefit the planet, so that we can collectively be the best that we can be on Earth and protect our planet for the future generations to come. That sounds lofty, but it's truly what we are able to achieve through space, through the unique vantage point of space. If we just turn to the climate emergency for a moment, which is just one of the huge number of use cases that space can support, we know that over half of the essential climate variables are only populated with data that comes from Earth observation satellites. There is something unique about space in that respect, and in telecoms and in navigation, and in exploration and in discovery science, and so much more. But I would argue the purpose, the reason we get out of bed, the convening rationale for us having a team is because we can make the world a fundamentally better place. My Ukrainian colleague puts it way better than I do when he says every country has a border with space. It brings us together. Space isn't something that is separate from planet Earth. It's completely connected. The problems on Earth have solutions from space. I'll talk a bit about humility later on. It's not that everything that we ever worry about on Earth can be supported by space, but it is a convening rationale, in my view, for why we do what we do, and why I think it's so important that the Chancellor protected the R&D budget out to the end of his Parliament. So if that's our sort of shared purpose, and I don't think there's anything more sort of visual demonstration of that than the Artemis program and the launch, and the fact that the Orion capsule is currently in orbit around the moon, and that we are going back. We will put the first person of colour, the first woman on the moon in this decade. If we go forward and look at what does that mean for the UK Space Agency, what does it mean for role clarity, I will not repeat what I know every one of you has read in the corporate plan for the UK Space Agency 2022 to 25, because it is such a document. But we do talk about our value proposition. We talk about the fact that it matters for us to bring money into the UK space sector for research, for development, for innovation, whether you're an academic or whether you're a member of the business community. We will catalyse investment for you. We will deliver missions and capabilities. We will do a lot of that in conjunction with the European Space Agency, but we will increasingly build up our national capabilities, whether that's on launch, as Rebecca was mentioning, or the national ADR mission that we've already announced. We will do that bilaterally as well, with colleagues in Australia, in the US, in Canada, Japan, and beyond. So we will deliver missions capabilities, we will catalyse investment, and we will champion space. We'll champion space for the value that it brings to the planet, both for business engagement, for all those sectors that don't necessarily see space as a driver of their added value, but at least as importantly to students, to the general public, so that we are clear about how we support the long-term skills agenda, but how we also don't just use education to drive space skills, but we also use space to drive education and inspiration for STEM subjects, for art subjects, and beyond, because space truly is ubiquitous. It's going to affect all our lives even more than it already does. I will not label the 8 different priorities in the corporate plan, because I want to leave you something to read afterwards if you haven't already done so, but they're important. They are setting out how much money we will associate with each of those priorities, which we talked about a bit at Farnborough as well. Meanwhile, we'll transform the agency. The agency, in my view, and I can say this as being someone who's relatively new to it, has done amazing work for many years since its inception in 2011, but we have to follow the national space strategy. We have to become a delivery-focused organisation, and one where it's a great place to work. And we'll invest in ourselves so that we're able to best invest and bring investment into the UK space sector. So if I go back to those particle physics days, 30 years ago, 30 meters underground, I would while away the hours when there wasn't a proton in sight down the beam pipe. And one of the things I would do was that as a scientist, I enjoyed looking at what the world is, and I'd look at the latest awesome picture from Hubble, and I would ruefully think to myself, what does particle physics have that can meet that? Because realistically, particle collisions are not quite as exciting as the pillars of creation. But now that we're in space together, I do think it's hugely important that we really use the true visual path to keep communicating, to keep talking to everyone about what space is and how big the team really is. I'm just going to talk briefly about the ministerial. Pay tribute actually to Dave, who's going to speak next. If we start with exploration, Dave runs the exploration, leads the exploration effort. It was far from easy to make sure that we had the full lunar program, the Mars program, low Earth orbit and beyond low Earth orbit funding cornerstones actually fully funded, but we got there. So across exploration, we have the Mars mission, Rosalind Franklin going back to the moon secured. We have what is fundamentally a UK nationally driven mission in Truths. It is delivered through and with partner organisations in ESA and other countries, but the large majority of the funding is through the UK, and that is very deliberate because we're building up national capability in Earth observation as we progress into the future and look at alternatives to Copernicus if that's what we need to do. We have the Vigil space mission sitting at the Lagrange point 5, able to see solar flares before they're visible directly in the line of sight to the Earth, fundamentally changing and improving the safety for our astronauts in space and for our critical national infrastructure on Earth. We have Moonlight doing lunar navigation, lunar communications, doing what we already do so well in orbit around the Earth, but now doing that around the moon. We have, to the question that Rebecca answered around sovereignty and security of componentry, we invested in the electromechanical and electronic components program to make sure that we have access to some of the critical base materials and componentry that would otherwise be at risk in the global supply chain, and plenty more besides. Rebecca touched on launch and the CAA's licensing of the spaceport, so please stay tuned, keep a watchful eye out over the next month or so to see Cosmic Girl streaking off and launch the one underneath her left wing. But in the interest of time, I won't try to go through everything that happened at the ministerial. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention an astronaut or two or three. I think it's one of the reasons why we came away with a successful ministerial output was because all the analogies with poker, they're great. Playing your cards close to your chest, that's fine. But it all breaks down. It all breaks down because poker is a game where ultimately you're seeking to take everybody else's money. And when I play, often giving my money away. Whereas the ministerial isn't that, and space isn't that. We need to build up national capability. We need to make sure that every pound of taxpayers' money from the UK is well used. And we're confident that's the case in ESA because we know from the economic evaluation that around £11.80 is returned to the full UK economy for every pound spent. But the reality is that ESA is a member states club. It's 22 countries that have to combine together to do something that none of them, whether you're CNES, your DLR, your ASI, or your ourselves, no country can do on its own. It's shared infrastructure, shared mission, shared capabilities. And we went in with that mindset. So what will it take to make the Italians successful as well as making ourselves successful when we talked about Moonlight or we talked about exploration? How can we support the Spanish? How can the Spanish support us when they came in on the Truth mission? And I think that's a useful way of looking forward for the way in which we will work. We're not working against others. We're just making sure that the UK space sector, as the National Space Strategy says, is in the sort of the foremost tier of all space nations. A little bit closer to home, it's quite nice to be able to announce today that just looking at our entrepreneurial Spark program that's been very successful in previous years as a space accelerator. We supported 88 businesses this year, raised £8.79 million in investment, and we will be continuing that program again this coming year. We'll also be launching the Space Clusters and Infrastructure Fund, as well as the next phase, as Rebecca mentioned, the National Space Innovation Programme. I won't repeat what we did on the Space Sustainability Summit, but it has made a global difference. It made policymakers in the DoD who joined for that conference recognise where we are, where Europe is heading, and want to be part of that and really sort of lead the global effort. So look, in conclusion, it's just a year or so since I joined. I feel a bit more confident, I'll be honest, talking than maybe I did on screen. I know a bit more, but I only know more because people have helped me understand the sector. I want to work alongside many of you in the room and beyond. It wasn't easy securing the space budget. wasn't easy at all, as recognised, and others too. But having done that, having invested in ESA, we have the opportunity to do things we just simply could not otherwise do to support our national ambitions as well as global ambitions. Now, it's not really the kind of great time to be complacent, given the way the wider world is. We need to take every opportunity we have to champion space. We need to have that humility that not everything that is a problem on Earth can be achieved through space. But we can, I think, recognise that in the sort of fragile world that we live in, we have a conscious decision to make as a space team. We can actively be out there helping everybody to understand that space can help the world to flourish, or we can look at how difficult and dark the future can be without the value of space. I think that gives us shared purpose. I think it's important that we have role clarity. I hope it's important also that we keep talking. Most of all, space is a team sport. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I absolutely love the way you talk about purpose and values. I think that that's a key thing because it makes it personal to each and every one of us. So I love that messaging that you're putting across there. Thank you. Questions from the floor up at the back there, if you can run safely up the stairs.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I was wondering about the forthcoming launch. Will there be a publicly announced launched window or series of windows so that we have a little bit of warning?
Yes, there will be. Now, Ian, where are you in the room? There we go. Ian, who's the SRO for launch, can say more specifically than that. Are we allowed to say a date? No. Coming.
Yes, of course, very much in the hands of technical readiness with Virgin Orbit, finalising the licensing. You'll appreciate the once European airspace and the agreements we need to get with airspace operators. Essentially, yes, as soon as we can, we will start to make sure that when the windows are, and there will be windows before. Because I ask this and others will also the same challenges with the technical, but it's our intention as soon as we know.
I've been promised, by the way, that we're not going to attempt to emulate and repeat JWST on Christmas Day, but we'll see.
Okay, we've got a question online.
As it's not always been smooth collaborating with the EU necessarily, in space in particular, are there any more plans for working closely with countries we've not worked with as much before? The example here given was India, potentially.
Yes. So we collaborate a lot within the European zone, if you like, and beyond. I mean, just a couple of European examples. So we work closely with the French on microcarb. Really interesting discussions with the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the Italians recently. But going beyond Europe, in India, so OneWeb launching with India as an example. So sometimes our job is front and centre with a national government mission. Sometimes there's work to be done in the background to support our commercial industry in work abroad. We have set up an international bilaterals fund, putting £20 million behind these relationships that go beyond Europe. Some of the kind of the priority countries include our AUKUS allies, so Australia, US, New Zealand. India is very important to us as well, and others too. So yeah, very much so.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to stop the questions there because we've run out of time. Will you be around over the coffee break, Paul?
I am around for another hour, so I think.
Fabulous. Oh, fabulous. Yeah. So please collar Paul during the breaks and ask him all of the questions that I know you have. Once again, thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.